Hello, everybody. It's your favorite sports podcast, people.
Yeah.
It's running out the clock, and we're here for another overtime episode. And you all know what that means. We're going to talk about stuff that maybe we didn't have time to talk about in a main podcast, or just didn't see fitting in well to what we were going to be doing. So we're going to take a few minutes to dive into this extra subject matter. Free football, free talking, free everything.
Exactly.
It's me, the giant redhead.
We just wanted to, we just found something we wanted to talk about, and we were just like, hey, you know what, it's going to be different, and we're just going to jump into it.
Yeah, it's just a different format. It's crazy.
Nonsense.
It's your third favorite giant redhead with no hair, Keith Harkins, joined by the actual host of this nonsense, Joseph Graven.
I'm taking the night off, though. I'm a correspondent tonight, bro.
Correspondent Joseph Graven. Well, everybody, it's football season, as you may have noticed.
Heard of it.
And we all know what that means. And that means that everyone who has anything to say about college football is going to start talking about Heisman candidates and Heisman numbers and what it means and everyone's Heisman moments. Got to love that catchphrase of what's everybody's Heisman moment going to be. So, well, we're somebody, and we're talking about college football, so we're going to talk about Heisman candidates.
Yeah, we are.
And really just the Heisman in general. Joseph and I have had many a discussion about the Heisman and what it means, what it should mean, and just kind of a general, lack of respect for it.
Right. That's a good way of wording it, because that's what I've been trying to figure out. There are two things that I constantly have in my head. It's one is when was the last time the Heisman Trophy winner was the right choice? You know, when was the last time that it actually made sense? And then the other being what even is the Heisman Trophy supposed to go to? Because does it go to the most valuable player on his team in the league? Does it go to the player that puts up the best statistics? Does it go to the best player on the best team? Because it just seems to alternate, and I have no idea what the Heisman even is anymore. What does it mean?
Yeah, and I think the only way to find that out is to visit a monk at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Only he knows. Or she, No,
it's Mr. Heisman himself.
Yeah, he's found his way to the top of the Himalayas.
Yeah, it's him. It's him. It's old Todd Heisman.
Todd Jeremy Heisman, the Heisman.
John Heisman. That was the guy's name. Shoot, I couldn't remember it. John Heisman. It's the actual most common surname, or not surname, first name in the world.
First
whatever.
name. Yeah.
Get me to shut up, please.
So kind of like what you said, we don't really know what it's supposed to mean. We've had years where it's been clearly the person that just put up ridiculous numbers. We've had years where it's gone to
that would be Tim Tebow, by the way.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then there's been years where it's kind of gone to a guy that's been kind of a cornerstone to a team who maybe didn't put up the best numbers, but was super reliable on a very good team. Somebody that comes to mind is Mark Ingram, maybe, who was just.
I would have said that would be Cam Newton.
True. Yeah. Well, because literally without Cam Newton, they're still a decent team, but they aren't anywhere near what they were.
No, they don't win a title without Cam Newton. So yeah. Cam Newton.
Yeah, for sure. And so we aren't really sure, again, what that means. I think the trophy is literally supposed to be the most valuable player award. But then the subjective nature of that is, is it the most valuable player to that team? Because that could be, some random quarterback from like Northwestern or, who didn't have a great team. But
I mean, it literally says it goes to the outstanding college football player whose performance best exhibits the pursuit of excellence with integrity. Winners epitomize great ability combined with diligence, perseverance, and hard work. So what does that even mean? It doesn't even say then, like, and I guess that's why there's so much ambiguity and why it can go back and forth. And like, here's my issue with it. And this is my soapbox that I'm going to go on. Because if there's any sort of consistency as to who it goes to, then like you'd be able to accurately predict who's going to win it during the year, based on certain things. Like you go back 10 years. Actually, let's go back to 2006, and you've got Troy Smith for Ohio State. Not an outstanding like statistical quarterback, but a guy who was leading Ohio State to a national championship game, and a key player for them, a valuable player, perhaps their most valuable player. But then the next season, you've got Tim Tebow. Of course, that was the year you fondly remember that in 2006, that's when Chris Leak wins a title over Ohio State. Tim Tebow comes and gets the starting job the next season and just has stupid stats. Yeah. Scores basically every touchdown in all of college football that year. I think even if he wasn't on the team, other teams' touchdowns got credited to Tim Tebow that season.
Yeah, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think he accounted for something like 50 plus touchdowns that season through the year and on foot. And just threw for a ton of yards, ran for a ton of yards. Was a stats monster by every possible meaning of the words.
Yeah, it was 55 total touchdowns, 32 in the air, 23 on the ground, along with over 3,000 passing yards and almost 900, a hair under 900 rushing yards. So just statistical monster. Of course, the Florida Gators football team goes 9-4 that year. Right. So not making an impact on the national landscape. Like Troy Smith does not have as dynamic of statistics the year that he wins the Heisman. I'm going to pull up his stats right quick, but you've got the 2006 season. Here it is. Yeah. He throws for under 3,000. He throws for 2,700 yards, 31 touchdowns, and only rushes for 228 yards and 1 touchdown. He was a pocket passing quarterback, So he wins it because he leads Ohio State to almost all the way to a title game. They were like the best team in the country for the entire season. He leads them. Tebow wins it because he puts up the stupid stats. The very next year, you have Sam Bradford who wins it. Again, not because Oklahoma was like about to win a title or anything, but because Oklahoma was because he was they had that awesome quarterback, shootout between Sam Bradford and Colt McCoy. And again, it was statistics. And then that's when you lead up to 2009, which is the year that neither of us feel comfortable with. And that's the year, of course, that Mark Ingram wins it, basically because he was on Alabama. And yeah, I have a conspiracy theory about all this, but I'll let you talk for a minute before I get into my conspiracy theory.
Yeah, Mark Ingram has a shade less than 2,000 yards total from a scrimmage. Good numbers. So he had 1,658 yards rushing, 334th receiving. So that still averages over 100 yards a game. That's still good, but there's a lot of running backs that average 100 yards a game.
Yeah.
In the NCAA. So did he really deserve it over basically like 20% of the other running backs playing? No, but he was on a really good Alabama team that went on to win the national championship that year.
Right.
So that's kind of what it turns into. If there's ever a situation where there's not just some stats monster that has 1,000,000 yards and 1,000,000 touchdowns, then they're going to give it to whoever they feel like is maybe the best player on the best team.
Yeah.
Which isn't always what you would call like a Heisman, like a legitimate Heisman candidate. And then a few years ago, you had the sort of birth of this whole Heisman moment. And the
Right.
first time that I actually heard it was the year that Johnny Manziel won it. And he had this one play, like second or third game of the season, where he scrambles around for like 20 seconds, throws a long ball, just a Hail Mary, and then one of the Texas A&M guys gets it and scores a touchdown. And that was when his Heisman campaign started, and they might as well have just given it to him then, because they kept saying Heisman moment. This is his Heisman moment.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. That's why I think at this point in time, this is what I've decided the Heisman Trophy actually is. All right. The Heisman Trophy, it doesn't matter if you're actually a good football player, if your team's good, whatever it may be. If you're a good story, you're winning the Heisman. That's all it is. The Heisman is basically going to be decided early in the year whenever the media attaches themselves to, and this is why I call it a conspiracy theory, because I'm turning into one of those guys who's like, the media is telling us, I'm about to open up the sports side of info wars over here, statistics wars, and be like, the media's lying to us.
The old man screams at the sky meme.
Right. I mean, that's exactly it. But you've got the media basically saying, okay, this is the best story that we've got. So that's why we're doing it. Like Troy Smith leads Ohio State. Like, so he's, a valuable player to Ohio State. It's good. Tim Tebow has all this hype coming out of high school. People have been waiting a year behind Chris Leak for him to actually have the starting job. And then he comes out and drops 55 touchdowns. So people are looking at that and going, okay, yeah, that's the storyline. We got to give it to him, because that was the best storyline in college football that year. Mm-hmm. The most enthralling storyline the next season was Bradford versus McCoy in this quarterback shootout, this Big 12 quarterback shootout. 2009, it's Mark Ingram. Alabama is back on top, Mm-hmm. Alabama's a prominent program again, but they've never had a Heisman Trophy winner before. And here's this guy who has this heartwarming story of coming up from not a whole lot. His father's in prison. We can get behind him. Mark Ingram wins the Heisman, even though he was not really that dynamic of a player, and even averaged less yards from scrimmage than other running backs in the conference per game, that is. He played in 14 games, so that helps. But anyway, Cam Newton comes along, and he's this JUCO kid who comes in, and and he just is electrifying. So he's electrifying. Robert Griffin's electrifying. Johnny Manziel's electrifying. Jameis Winston's electrifying. And also, we really want to have another freshman win it. You have Marcus Mariota in there, which is important because he's one of the few who probably deserved it. Mm-hmm. He was a guy who, his team wouldn't have been where they were without him. And people had been, but again, it's the best story because people had been dying for Oregon to actually have national championship contender teams for years now. And he finally was the guy to get him there. So it just comes down to who is the best story. Baker Mayfield made the most headlines last year. That's why he's winning it. That's what it comes down to. Saquon Barkley was a better player. I still hold that Saquon was a better player. Lamar Jackson, I think deserved it, but again, he was electrifying. He made the most headlines. That's all the Heisman is anymore. I want to go ahead and put that. I make a motion that we decide that's all the Heisman is. Are we good with that?
Yeah, I'm going to second that.
It's hype. It's a hype
Heisman
award.
the Heisman Hype Award, and that's
it means nothing. The
so you've heard it
sound
here.
of fury signifying nothing. Anyway.
You've heard it here first, folks. We're going. We are calling it that the Heisman Trophy is going to be renamed the Heisman Hype Award.
That's it.
So there's a lot that we talked about here that's probably going to be foreshadowing a little bit what we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit. But so this is an SEC podcast. We've been talking about the Heisman. So
haven't even been talking about the Knowles that much. We mentioned Jameis. Now we've been
talking about the Knowles, Jameis Winston, crab legs. Anyway, so the SEC has some really strong, I think, Heisman candidates this year. I'm not sure if it's because the SEC has actually strong Heisman candidates in terms of numbers, or if it's just because it's kind of a down year this year because there's not that one guy that we've seen come up over the last few years that we've seen kind of build towards this like natural Heisman year, you know, like with Sam Bradford and Tebow, like you could see that it was coming, you know. So in your mind, who from the SEC kind of stands out as a potential Heisman favorite?
Heisman favorite is, in my mind, you got the two terms people love, either Heisman favorite or Heisman dark horse.
Yeah.
Which is the term that means this guy's not going to win it. He's probably a better player, but he's not going to win it because he's not as popular.
Right.
As far as favorites go, I mean, I think it's obvious. You do a Google search for Heisman favorites, and you do a Google search for Heisman dark horses, and only a few SEC names pop up on all this. There's a few guys from outside of the SEC that I do want to mention probably later on since you haven't asked anything about it, but that I think are the actual dark horses for this season that people need to be paying close attention to if they're casual football fans. But in the SEC, I mean, the favorite is Tua, you know. Tua Tagovailoa. I know I butchered it, but that's it. He's up at near the top of everyone's list, even though he's not technically clearly the starting quarterback at Alabama.
Right.
But, he's up at the top of the list because people have these high expectations and they think that, and right now, obviously the Alabama quarterbacking thing is the headline that people want to talk about a lot. And whether or not he ever deserves it, he's going to be in that conversation. And I think if he's in that conversation, and also Nick Saban causing a fuss about stuff, is keeping the discussion in the headlines, which I think is smart by Nick Saban because he knows that whoever gets the most headlines gets the Heisman.
Yep.
So, honestly, if you're going to talk about Tua, I don't think that you can rule out Jalen Hurts as being, technically speaking, a Heisman candidate. There was Heisman talk about Jalen when he was a true freshman because he surprised everyone. I just don't think that he was quite electrifying enough. And that's his main issue, is that he's not an electrifying player. He's very, very composed. He went 17-1 as far as like touchdown interception ratio last season, which is stupid. So if you just ignore that, you do him a disservice. But I mean, if you're talking about an SEC Heisman favorite, it's got to be Alabama, whoever the Alabama quarterback is, right? That's the favorite.
Yeah, and so it's real interesting that the kind of SEC Heisman favorite, or maybe even the favorite right now, just in terms of looking at the whole nation, is again this young electrifying player that's looking to unseat this established quarterback that's only lost one game for Alabama.
Right.
You know, there's the whole story of, well, he comes in and saves Alabama in the national championship game. There's a lot of offseason talk about, well, who's going to get the starting job? And then they're named like co-starters, but then Tua gets the most playing time, the most reps, and has what everybody's calling an electrifying game.
Right.
Which, looking at the stats, he had a solid game. I think the electrifying part comes in because they keep showing these clips where he's Johnny Manzielling all over the field, and
Right.
like isn't really trusting his protection. He's just scrambling and quote unquote making plays happen.
His Heisman moments, Keith.
Yeah, that's his Heisman moment when he ran for 40 yards in the pocket and then threw for like a 10-yard game.
Yep,
that's it.
Electrifying.
Yeah. So and running out the clock, co-founder Chandler Rollin texted me the other day because we were kind of talking about this.
I believe his name's pronounced Chandelier.
Chandelier Rollin. He's French, but he was basically telling me that it's a lock for Tua to get it because they've already started hyping him up so much.
Oh yeah.
And like you said earlier, Heisman hype starts really early, and whoever it is that gets all this press and all this, screen time or whatever, that's typically who wins it, unless they have a major collapse. And another thing that kind of points to that is a couple of years ago, whenever Derrick Henry won it, he was the story from game one. And he had a good year. But then you had this guy, Christian McCaffrey, up at Stanford that broke a few of Barry Sanders' records, had like 2,600 yards of like total offense from a scrimmage. I mean, had an amazing year and doesn't win it because somebody else had a better story.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly it. I'm pulling up his stats right now because I feel, and we had kind of mentioned this when we had discussed about, recording this episode. I don't feel quite as bad about the Derrick Henry choice as I do the Mark Ingram choice, because Mark Ingram, you could have put Mark Ingram on any other team than Alabama, and he would not have had success. And you could have put a lot of different players on that Alabama team with that offensive line that they had, which was stupid. They would have had success. Henry was similar, but Derrick Henry also ran for, by the time the season was done, he rushed for over 2,200 yards.
Yeah.
That includes the postseason. So that's, 2 extra games. But, that's a stupid amount, and 28 rushing touchdowns. He ran for like the most yardage maybe in SEC history, I think.
Like he was a strong candidate, had a great year also.
Yeah, I agree with you that he won it mostly because, again, best player, best team. And so the hype was there. But Christian McCaffrey was a really good storyline that year. He was an all-purpose, do-it-all type of guy. He even had a kind of a breakout rookie season in Carolina last year, and so much so that Carolina is relying on him to be like their main back this season, I believe. McCaffrey is a heck of a player who had a son of an NFL player. His brothers are all going to be stud college players as well. Like there's a good storyline there as well. So it's shocking that they went with Henry, but it's also not shocking because he was the Alabama running back, and so people are like, "Well, we should give it to him now."
Right? Yeah, exactly. I do think the part of what hurt Christian McCaffrey's chances was the fact that he only accounted for 13 touchdowns total.
Exactly.
And so when the other guy doubles you up there, that's a hard argument.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 28 rushing touchdowns, and then you look also at the fact that, Henry was not a receiving threat. That's all he did. You handed him the ball. He rushed almost 400 times on the season. Like Alabama's offense was pretty obvious in 2015.
Was Derrick Henry. Yep.
Yeah. That 2015 Alabama team, I'm pulling up their stats now. But, that's right. That was Jake freaking Coker.
Oh, my gosh.
How in the world was that guy
somehow
a winning quarterback?
Yeah. Derrick Henry gifted him a national championship.
Oh, yeah. That's maybe it. Jake Coker might be the least deserving. Now, I mean, here's the thing: Coker was good enough to throw for over 3,000 yards. Again, this is an Alabama offensive line. Nick Saban's smart, man. He knows that football is won when you control the line of scrimmage. He gets the best offensive lineman he can find, and he just puts pieces back there that are going to, make it happen. That's why, if the SEC wants to compete with Nick Saban, they need to get defensive lines that can control the line of scrimmage more than anything else. But yeah, it's just nasty. It's just nasty looking back and all that. But we're looking back again. I guess we need to look at this year.
Yeah, probably.
I forgot what we were talking about.
Yeah. So the probably the leading candidate this year right now is Tua.
Yeah.
For all the reasons that we've thrown out there for you guys. I think maybe as one of the kind of more pure passing quarterbacks that maybe has a chance at winning it would be Drew Lock.
Yeah.
Out of Missouri. I mean, last year he threw for a hair under 4,000 yards, which, by the way, is crazy.
Yes, it is.
He threw for 3,964 yards on 419 attempts, 44 touchdowns, which, by the way, is one more touchdown than Heisman winner Baker Mayfield.
How does that compare to Mayfield's passing stats? I haven't looked that up.
Yeah, so the year that Mayfield won it last year, he had
4,600.
This is crazy, 4,600. Yeah, so.
And what's also crazy is that Mayfield completed 70% of his passes.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield had a pretty historic season.
Yeah, I mean, you can't you can't deny it. I'm not really upset that like Saquon Barkley didn't win. He would have gotten my vote if I had a vote. But I mean, Mayfield was had a heck of a season.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a great story because he was like a former walk-on at Texas Tech.
Yeah, and an absolute lunatic.
Yes, also just a complete douche.
and like that's one of the interesting things, right? Is because that sort of polarized fans a little bit. Some loved his quote unquote swagger and his attitude, and then others hated him because he was very, 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 very confident. And when you get past two varies, that just means that you're conceited and kind of a douche. But yeah, so Drew Lock looks to kind of build upon last year. His percentage wasn't as good, completing only 57% of his passing. But if he has stats similar to what he had last year, and maybe even builds on that, I think he has a good shot. At the very least, making like the final three. Yeah.
He's one of the most talented returning quarterbacks in all of college football. And he's one of those names that if you do a search for what people are considering to be dark horse candidates, he's one of the top names on all of the lists out there. He's got the talent. A lot of people thought that if the quarterbacking class was just a little bit weaker going into the NFL last season, he would be gone. But he looked at the other players going and said, you know what, I'll have one more year. I don't think my draft stock's going to go down that much compared to being buried underneath like Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and, Sam Darnold, all that. It was a deep, draft class when it came to quarterbacks. And Drew Lock looked at that and said, I'm coming back. I can make the most out of this. The thing about Lock, because he's on my list too, as far as guys to look out for in the SEC for getting Heisman attention. It relies almost entirely on Missouri having enough success to maintain the spotlight. Yep. You think about one of the most recent times I can think of, and you can correct me on this if there's been someone more recently, but I think about Dak Prescott at Mississippi State as being one of the more recent times that a dark horse Heisman guy got a lot of attention, but then the team fell apart at the end of the season. So suddenly he's not even in the conversation anymore.
Right. Right.
During the 9 games in which, they reached the number 1 ranking, 9-game winning streak. During that stretch, he gets in. It's a good enough storyline again where he's in the conversation, and then when the luster wears off, he's out. And I fear that's going to be the exact same thing that happens to Drew Lock this year. If Missouri doesn't surprise some people, and I don't know, maybe win the East, then he doesn't stand a chance. It seems as though no matter what his statistics will be, and I think he'll be drafted high, it seems as though his chances of winning the Heisman, in my eyes, comes down to whether or not Missouri can make a really big run in the SEC East.
Yeah, and what's sad about that is that so like last year they went 7-6, pretty good for them, went to a bowl game. But unfortunately 7-6 isn't going to be enough to get you, like you said, enough attention to really garner those votes that you need. And the sad part about it is that he could throw for 4,600 yards and 50 touchdowns and not get in the top 5 because Missouri might go 6-7 this year.
Right.
Because they might not have a very good defense.
Yeah.
So it's a little upsetting and kind of sad when somebody can maybe throw for the most yards in school history in a single season by 1,000 yards and not win the Heisman because their defense was a sieve.
Right. Exactly. It'll be kind of heartbreaking for Drew Lock to basically play so well in almost obscurity.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a fine player, and I hope that he has a great professional career to make up for the fact that he's ended up on some Missouri teams that just don't get any sort of attention, at all. So
for sure.
Another guy, if I could move on to someone else.
Yeah, for sure.
Who pops up on a lot of lists that I do think will get the attention for much of the same reason that Tua or Jalen Hurts have gotten attention in the past is Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Another guy who you see him pop up in some of the betting odds on Heisman favorites. Not very high on the list for obvious reasons because he doesn't necessarily stand out from a statistical standpoint. Mm-hmm. He was a true freshman, and he's an 18, 19-year-old kid forced into responsibility last year and led a good Georgia team to a national championship game. He threw for 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 7 interceptions on a 62% completion, which for a guy who hadn't played college ball before is a good debut.
Yeah. I mean, for a true freshman who at the start of the year didn't think that he had any chance of actually getting in a game.
Right.
And then an injury forced him into starting the year, what was it at Notre Dame?
Yeah. It wasn't their first game of the season. I think that's right.
Yeah. And so those are good numbers for anybody, much less a true freshman having to come in and kind of shoulder the load.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It was a really good, storyline. People could get behind it. And I think that's why people are still thinking about him as being maybe the type of guy to be a top choice here. I'm looking it up real quick. No, it was App State. Appalachian State was their first game of the year last year. Yeah. Eason only attempted 3 passes in that game. Fromm only attempted 15, but still. So Fromm was starting against Notre Dame in the second game of the season. But yeah, so he's a good player, and I think he's a player that this year is going to cut down tremendously on interceptions. Mm-hmm. And if Georgia continues to be any good at all, then you could see him easily reach 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, and probably cut down on interceptions and hopefully win some games. If that's the case, I don't think that's enough to win a Heisman. He's going to have to get at least 3,000 yards and closer to like 30 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Especially because they don't have the same running game that they did last year to rely on. So he's going to be the focal point, and that's why he gets more attention this season, I think, at least.
Yeah, for sure. And again, part of that is just going to be that, Kirby Smart's going to have to trust him more going forward. And I think that he's proven that he can, because he did a great job managing that offense last year.
Yeah, he did. Again, we talk about our disdain for the term game manager when it comes to quarterbacks on the podcast. And I mostly don't like it because I don't like it as an insult. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to have a game manager. People talk about, oh, well, you can't, people act like you can't win with a game managing quarterback. Well, tell that to a true freshman at Georgia who led him to a national championship game last year. Tell that to Matt Flynn at LSU, 13 years ago, who won a national title with him.
Yeah, and every Alabama quarterback or for like the last 10 years.
Yeah, tell that to every single initial named Alabama quarterback. A.J. McCarron, J.K. Rowling, all of those Alabama quarterbacks.
Yeah, all the mix and max over there,
Right, exactly. Greg McElroy. He didn't have initials, but they should have called him G.G. McElroy. I said.
G.G. Yeah. Good game. Lights out, fellas. So we got maybe the obvious front runner that maybe wasn't so obvious to people who just watch games and don't read everybody's hot takes. Tua, you've got maybe the guy that should be getting way more attention in Drew Lock. And then you got kind of the dark horse, quote unquote, of Jake Fromm.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else that stands out? I know that State fans were kind of driving the bus for a Nick Fitzgerald Heisman campaign.
And it wasn't even necessarily. I'm sure they were driving the bus but he was one of those guys who was getting some national attention as a potential dark horse. For the reasons that you saw, probably Tim Tebow or Dak Prescott, he kind of just scored a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
And people really get behind that. And he's gotten national media attention. There we go. I can put a sentence together. Good Lord. I think mostly because because of Coach Joe Moorhead, the way he runs the team. He runs the offense with much more of an emphasis on a vertical passing game, unlike Dan Mullen, who likes to run a lot of screens, slants, mid-range. And that tends to play into Fitzgerald's strength because he's a very strong arm and tends to be more accurate on deep balls than he is on shorter medium routes, which is alarming and what accounted for the fact that he's never really thrown for more than like 55% completion percentage, on his career. And so you have a more vertical passing game, but he's one of those guys that it's going to depend entirely on what his team does. Yeah. I mean, if Dak Prescott got a lot of attention a couple of years ago because Mississippi State stormed out to a number 1 ranking and upset like 3 top 10 opponents in a row, Fitzgerald's going to have to lead Mississippi State to some monumental victories and put them on some national prominence. Because then it'll be the same sort of story as Dak Prescott was, here's this guy who wasn't recruited by anybody. And, one coach saw the potential in him. And then that coach went to Florida. And so another coach, so it would be the same thing. I mean, Mississippi State would have to, because Mississippi State was also a dark horse pick in the SEC West to maybe challenge one of the top spots. That would have to pan out for Nick Fitzgerald to be considered a dark horse Heisman candidate as well. And that's why you could never see that happening.
Right.
Because that's a lot of this will have to pan out and this in order for that to happen. And it just, most likely is not. But yeah, he's a name that would get thrown out there a lot for probably good reason. He just kind of was a touchdown machine. And if he shows improvement under a new head coach, then, that's what you need to see out of a senior quarterback. Also, he was a senior quarterback in a conference, and that's that in and of itself is going to get him some attention. But I think if you really wanted to stretch for a real deep dark horse possible pick, like real deep, like no chance of it ever happening, but if you wanted me to
black dark horse.
Yeah, exactly. Like straight up, like it's midnight and the street lights have gone out and there's this guy winning a Heisman in pitch blackness. It would be Raekwon Davis, defensive lineman at Alabama. I think that there's a lot of people who make a push for defensive players to win a Heisman every year. And that's not surprising, but there's a lot of push for some defensive linemen this season, a handful of them. And I think if you're going to pick one in the SEC, it'd be him because he's going to be maybe the most dynamic defensive player that Alabama has, and maybe the most important at least. And so I could see him being a real far-reaching dark horse candidate.
Yeah, and as a former defensive lineman, it'd be really cool to see a defensive player win it for the first time since what Woodson did back in like the 90s.
Yeah. He was the last one to do it. That was 1997 because that was the year that people thought Peyton Manning deserved it more. But even back in 97, it was a bigger story to give it to a defensive player.
Yeah, so I don't know if a defensive player is ever going to win it again, especially since Jadeveon Clowney's like junior year, he had 6 million tackles and like a whole bunch of sacks and fumbles and, just had a monstrous season and still didn't win it. Because people love offense. People love, gaudy passing numbers. People love 2,000-yard rushers. So I think that's always going to win out. But yeah, I would be over the moon to see a defensive player win it.
I think
even if it is somebody from Alabama.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you go back even before Woodson, the last guy that I can see on this list that played on defense was in 1961, Ernie Davis of Syracuse, who was a linebacker but was also their running back. So the key is every 30 years, or you have to play both sides of the ball. Yeah, that's it. That's all it is.
So we're due next decade for a defensive guy to win it.
Exactly. Maybe I'm overlooking someone here, but it doesn't look like it. But that being said, if you wanted me to look nationwide, 2 names that I think outside of the SEC who actually are the top dark horse candidates, that's UFC quarterback Mackenzie Milton, just a phenomenal player, and absolute beast who is generating a lot of attention right now. So the storyline might be there, but Houston defensive tackle Ed Oliver.
Yeah. Good names. And again, it'd be wonderful to see a defensive lineman get it. I have to give a shout out to my boy. He's no longer in the SEC, but Will Grier, West Virginia quarterback, who is also considered to be a quote unquote dark horse candidate to take the trophy home. Had 3,500 passing yards last year, 34 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, and that was with a season cut short because of a broken thumb. He had a really good year last year. He had a heck of a weekend this past weekend, so he's off to a good start. He also maybe has a story, a weird one, but sort of a redemption story, if you will, because
story.
He had to sit out, a year and a half because of what happened, and then comes back and throws for 3,400 yards. I mean, that's a pretty good way to pick back up, where you left off. So it'll be really cool to kind of see these quarterback battles happening nationally, and especially in the SEC West between Tua and Nick Fitzgerald. To kind of see where that goes. It'll be really fun to see, Drew Lock throw for 1 billion yards and then get sabotaged by his own team.
Right. Yeah. 1 billion yards and go like 4-4 in the conference or something.
Yeah.
No, I do think I picked Missouri to be third in the East.
Yeah, it'd be.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah. I was going to say that it'd be cool to make them or like see them make a run, but I don't want to see that happen at the expense of my Gators. But, would still be cool to see what happen. Well, I think that'll just about do it for this Heisman special overtime episode.
Can you tell that I'm a little cynical about the Heisman Trophy? I hope that's the tone I really wanted to convey in this podcast, was how grumpy and curmudgeonly I've become. Curmudgeonly I've become in my old age over here.
Yeah, you become the Clint Eastwood on a porch of the Heisman discussion.
I don't think Mark Ingram deserved it. Get off my lawn.
Well,
that almost turned into Harrison Ford in Air Force One. Get off my plane.
Get off my plane. Well, it's all the same. Some old guy yelling at somebody from a different country.
That's it. Shut it down.
Yeah, well, that'll do it for ROTC boys on this overtime episode. If you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe and follow us on your favorite social media and podcasting source. Let us know what you think. Tweet at us. Reply directly to the posts. However you want to do it. Are we insane for our thoughts on the Heisman? Do our candidates make sense? And do our reasonings make sense?
I can already tell you they don't.
They almost never do. If you've listened to this podcast, it's almost entirely nonsense, but we're very proud of it.
Good for you for listening.
Good for you guys. And we thank you and we love you.
That's a little far.
Well, I love you. And that's it. I love you. Goodbye.